telling me about Porter Goss?
Yeah.
Okay. And he's a state rep in Florida, right? Former
Right.
CIA guy.
Yeah.
And he's the guy that was also financed by the Indianapolis Star owner at one time?
Yeah.
Okay. And Lester Logue? You were telling me something about him, but I don't remember what it was.
In the 60s and into the 70s, he was the campaign chairman for the Republican National Committee.
Oh.
Chief fundraiser.
Oh, okay. Like the finance.
Look magazine back in 68 or 69 did a big spread, and there were full-page photographs, which was unusual. You didn't see that in Look, as usually in Life magazine. And they had the whole list of characters that they were interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And out popped Lester Logue. There he was, and there was his bio, which I hadn't realized before.
Okay.
When Bob Morris sent me over to see Lester in 63, or in 62, was it?
Bob, who, Morrow or Moore?
Robert Morris, big wealthy guy in Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
close to the Hunts and everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Right winger, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And then
I was sent to Morris by the crippled congressman from California, Robert Rousselot, who was the only member of Congress who was one of the founders of the John Birch Society.
Ah, okay.
And I spent some time with Rousselot looking for support, and he sent me on, as my uncle did, to some very powerful people.
And the support was for what?
For anti-Castro operations.
Okay. Okay. And Morse, is it M-O-R-S-E or M-O-R?
M-O-R-I-S.
Okay. And then how does Devlin West fit in here? Or does he?
Devlin West.
Yeah, or maybe
thinking of Frank Devlin, who was chief of station in the Congo.
Okay. I don't know where I got West from. Or, no idea. So now he ties into this too, or not?
No, that was another matter. That
Okay.
was Operation 40, QJ Win, and Rogue, and the rest of the things.
Okay, so he was
the guy that brought Rogue and Win to the or activated them in the Congo to take out Lumumba and a number of other people.
Okay. So he brought the Win and Rogue. Okay. Have you heard of QJ? As weird as it sounds, QJ Place and QJ Show?
No.
Okay. That came from Holt. He said he knew QJ Win. He goes,
cryptonyms?
Yeah.
Well, the only place could have got him was from Phil Agee's book, because nobody, the church committee didn't go into any other cryptonyms using the QJ digraph.
Okay. And what's the QJ digraph?
Nobody identified what the QJ digraph is.
I mean, what digraph does QJ represent?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Because I know
I think QJ represented, my guess is it represented Charles Syracuse's Bureau of Narcotics assassin squad.
Oh, okay.
People that came from another government agency, Federal Bureau of Narcotics, overseas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, okay, if I remember correctly, Charles Kane was at the meeting with Van Hook, sending people to the Congo as mercenaries to form a commando group in, 61, 62 roughly?
In 61 and in late 61.
Okay. Were you at the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Do you know if he's alive, Van Hook?
I think he's dead. I think he went back to Europe to die about 10 years ago.
Okay.
The last time I saw him was 92.
Okay. Do you think he had anything to do with Dallas?
Who's to know? He As far as we know, he was taking care of the bush nigger problem in French Guiana at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
And a gold mining operation for a Belgian-French consortium that was having trouble with the natives upriver in the mountains that Sir Walter Raleigh thought was the location of El Dorado.
So I always thought that somebody of the caliber of Q.J. Wynn would have avoided the Dallas scene for much the same reasons as somebody like you would have, meaning that it was
well, there's various means of getting somebody in a compromising situation, and then the people of that talent, especially those with Corsican connections and Belgian connections and what have you, would be primary candidates to hire to do the job. Because they wouldn't be recommended to Devlin unless they knew what the hell they were doing. Multilingual and familiar with the geographics and also the techniques, and that's where Freddie Forsyth got his info to do the book Day of the Jackal. After he met with Espaillat and the people in Montreal, he went on to Lisbon, talked to Scorzani, and then made the rounds of the Corsicans and everybody else, and probably dealt with Rogue, Wynn, and a number of others.
And who was Rogue?
Nobody's sure. Somebody said it was Martel.
But wasn't he at the same? He wasn't at the meeting with for the Congo operation.
Who knows?
He could have been, but you wouldn't have known who he was anyway.
No.
I got you. Was Martel there?
I don't know Martel. I wouldn't know what Martel. Harvey's files indicate better description as Weberman published it on his website, these documents that he got on Bill Harvey's files. I haven't seen all of Bill Harvey's files. All I see was Weberman taking everything out of context and speculating on what Harvey's files said without producing copies of the files. And I have a whole bunch of researchers that have fallen down on the job and have not produced the files to, if just as to contradict Weberman or enlarge on Weberman's speculations or contradict them. Nobody's come up with those files that Weberman identifies by number. So what's happening there?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to really do your job, you're going to take Weberman to task and check out these documents and the whole business. I'm the one that identified Carswell for him because he was in the same cell with me in jail in Cuba. And then he eventually identified him as Christ.
Oh, yeah. That David Christ guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's erroneous, isn't it?
What's erroneous?
Okay, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, well...
Chris was sent supposedly down to do wiretaps from an apartment above the Communist Chinese news agency Xinhua, which in actuality is Chinese Communist military intelligence, and that they were going to tap in and get their codes. And I said no, they had two plans. One was to gas the apartment and go in and get the code books and all of that while everybody was unconscious, and then blow the place up using propane or methane gas, which was in use in that apartment house in Havana.
Well, what I meant was Weberman came up with that.
He was one of the tramps.
Right.
He wiped his ass in Dealey Plaza.
Right.
What hell, this other horse shit.
Yeah, that's erroneous. Okay,
totally.
That's the part I was talking about.
It's where he jumps out into UFO country.
Right.
You know, identifies some guy as just like he did with Sturgis. Sturgis is supposed to be the tall tramp. Anybody that knows Sturgis, and then It comes out closer to B. Harrelson, and
yeah,
you know,
and E. Howard Hunt.
You just can't. I mean, you try to give details to Weberman, and he fucking argues with you. And I call him a fucking fat fucking Jew book reader. All he does is read fucking books. He doesn't go out and do any investigation at all.
And then he doesn't believe it when he does do it.
And then when he gets facts, he wants to argue against the fucking facts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's even got E. Howard Hunt.
He's got his own agenda.
As the old tramp.
He's doing the same thing. He was doing the same thing that the fucking CIA people were doing in their reports.
Mm-hmm.
And when I disagreed, especially with Angleton or his people, they said, "Well, we know we got moles in here. Havana and Moscow, and everybody's reading the shit, and you better hope nobody says anything nice about you. You'd be a dead man."
Yeah, yeah. Another question. Ever hear of something called Operation Swift Strike? And here's the legend on it. It was an Army Air Force operation that supposedly took place just a few days before the assassination. Something to do with a large unit from Texas that was mobilized to make the trip to Dallas to supplement the Secret Service along with the Fort Sam Houston unit, but instead was sent to...
The 112th Military Intelligence Reserve.
Right, well, that was the Fort Sam Houston group. There apparently was a second one that was supposed to be mobilized to supplement them.
Fort Sam's down in San Antonio.
Right. And apparently...
They were activated for the San Antonio visit.
Okay, well, this other one was supposedly sent to Central America at the last minute to have some kind of war game exercise. Ever heard of that?
No, they didn't have no Central American war games at that time.
Okay.
No such thing.
Okay.
Weren't even official advisors down there. That's why we got in trouble when we went on the search and rescue for Rourke, when we went over to the meeting with the military attaches and together with the Guatemalan Air Force people at the El Camino, no, not at one of the safe houses, got into an argument. Well, you people aren't, I told them, you people aren't going to be fucking helpful because you're covering up for the fact that there are special forces here fighting the guerrillas up in the Pétain, and they're not supposed to be there. And they got all pissed off about that. That if the plane had landed in the Pétain, they would have covered it up. If the plane had crashed in guerrilla territory, they would have covered it up. And they turned the report around to say that I was being disloyal, that, you know, all kinds of horse shit the Army came up with.
Anything else that you can think of on, what's his name, Charles Kane?
No, because it was only around me and the second, what we call the secondary group, for a short period of time, identified as a penetrator and went on his way. And from there, we heard he went back on contract with the element that was either at Jewfish Creek or at Elliott Key off of Key Biscayne, where Rosselli and what's his name, Bradley Ayers, and those people were training two groups. Because we heard from the Cubans from these groups who was there from that had been with us in the Glades camps or the Lake Okeechobee camps or the Florida Keys camps, because they kept coming back and forth. And instead of sitting on their ass, they would come back and forth to the point that it was very annoying that the CIA people were taking our best graduates and using them, you know, for various operations, and then leaving them sitting on their ass for too long, when we knew that Bobby Kennedy and everybody else were supposed to be doing something, and they weren't. And everybody, Shackley and everybody else, were getting pissed off because we were snitching them out, you know, to the White House, that they were sitting on their ass and not doing operations.
Now, Brad Ayers emailed me after I did that one article and said that he didn't know...
Which article was that?
The one your brother read to you?
I haven't seen a copy of it yet.
Well, basically, I had mentioned his name, and one of his associates emailed me, and basically said that he did not know Charles Kane, but he did say that he knew somebody who fits the same profile, but he only knew him as Chuck. Now, I haven't called Brad himself yet. I got his number here. I'm going to call him. But it seemed to me that you and I haven't mentioned your name at all in any of this, but I mean, you sound pretty confident that he did know the man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was hearing it from the Cubans. The only time I had discussions with Brad Ayers was later on. He set up a company called Ayer Ventures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and he had some Taylor craft. You might mention to him he had some Taylor aircraft at the old Tamiami Airport. Okay, this was '64, and the old Tamiami Airport is now Florida International University. I mean, there's little pieces of concrete left. The control tower is where the president of the university used to have his office, but that was the old airport we all used.
Mm-hmm.
We have what's called the new Tamiami Airport farther south down by the federal prison.
Was it Tamiami?
Tamiami, T-A, and then Miami.
Oh, okay.
Because the Tamiami Trail is southwest 8th Street that begins at Biscayne Bay and goes out through the Everglades all the way to Naples. It's called the Tamiami Trail.
Okay.
It's a Miccosukee name, Seminole. They say people confuse Seminoles with Miccosukee. Seminoles are farther north. Miccosukees are the ones that are in the Everglades.
Okay.
So at the old Tamiami Airport, he had a number of small training planes, and when I was organizing a flying club amongst my Green Beret reservists, I decided to make a deal with him that I would do the ground school part of it to keep the costs down, and then he would give part of the flight instruction. I would start them out with a plane that I was running for $35 a day, practically. Or it was kind of a funny situation, beat up old plane, and the way I did it saved everybody a lot of money. But that was the last time I talked with Brad Ayers, and I knew who he was, and I knew Ayer Ventures was his own thing. It wasn't a CIA proprietary.
Okay. And Kane was down there,
so
too.
I figured he was out of business by then.
Mm-hmm. And Kane was down there?
No, Kane wasn't seen by any of our people after '62.
Well, okay, because what I'm confused about is I thought you were saying that this was how
Ayers worked Elliott Key in '63.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dave Korn has him as an Air Force officer. He's actually Army Airborne Ranger type guy, not necessarily Green Beret qualified, who was brought down as a contract CIA employee to give training to that group that was under the auspices of Morales and Rosselli and the rest of that crew to do assassinations.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how that ties into Kane is where I'm confused.
Well, Kane went over to that group,
mm-hmm.
according to the Cubans who knew Kane from our camp.
Okay. So
because
they knew.
Those Cubans came back and forth
mm-hmm.
and identified. They're very loose-lipped, and they had the confidence when they were talking to us, and sometimes would go into great detail over the campfire,
mm-hmm.
or we're cooking our rice and beans and eating raccoon
mm-hmm.
and mudfish and catfish and all that shit. You have nothing else to do, and they would tell stories about the different personalities and what was happening,
mm-hmm.
and why they had left these programs, and how the training wasn't worth a shit. If especially the guys that had survived the Bay of Pigs,
mm-hmm.
okay, were saying if they'd had the training we gave, they would have had more survivors from the Bay of Pigs, and they wouldn't have surrendered, because they would have known how to live off the land and would have known that all they had to do was dig down 3 feet and there was fresh water
mm-hmm.
in the Bay of Pigs, and they wouldn't have to drink their urine and all this other kind of shit,
mm-hmm.
and they could have lived off the land there for months.
Mm-hmm.
because in the Bay of Pigs area, it's like the Everglades. You can't find a swinging dick. Even tougher than in Vietnam. They would have, as a whole brigade, turned into Viet Cong. But they weren't given the proper training to do that. The whole program started out that way with what they called the Blackhawks, which was a comic strip of various heroic characters of various ethnic backgrounds that went out and did Mission Impossible type stuff. Of course, you had Steve Canyon with one comic strip that followed agency operations, but the Blackhawks was a comic book and comic strip that had these guys doing this, doing that, and it was popular in Latin America, especially Cuba. But, of course, the Spanish version had a different name for them. They didn't call them the Blackhawks. And they referred to the group that was run by the Filipino colonel, Napoleon Valeriano, who there was known as Colonel Vallejo, who had fought in Mindanao against the Japanese, and the CIA guys around him that had also fought in the Philippines against the Japanese. They weren't part of the Detachment 101. And like Jack Hawkins, the number 2 guy, who had fought as a guerrilla and then was taken by submarine and was involved in Iwo Jima, there were different turfs there. And the original group training these people to work as guerrillas were veteran guerrillas from the Philippines, because Ed Lansdale knew them and brought them in because he had met them when he was working with Ramon Magsaysay in the Philippines, as mentioned in the book The Quiet American with Audie Murphy, and then in the book The Ugly American. That's where Lansdale is mentioned in 2 books. Okay, so Lansdale's first group, the Cubans didn't have a lot of respect for them, because they were mostly former Batista-type army assholes that didn't believe in unconventional warfare, weren't airborne trained, weren't trained in shit, and had never really fought against the rebel army in Cuba. They were office pinkies, except guys like San Roman and a couple of others. But these Lansdale people, the first team to start training people in Guatemala, were not held in high respect, and that's why a Green Beret team was sent down. Okay? But then when they said, bullshit, it's going to take too long to do the guerrilla thing, not being as patient as the Viet Minh or the Viet Cong, we're going to have to make a frontal, conventional, amphibious operation. They brought in a new crew of people to train these guys. And at no time were these people trained by any of the groups in Guatemala, Panama, to live off of the land. Part of taking one group down to Panama was to turn them into instructors, But even in Panama, they didn't learn how to live off the land. They didn't even go through the later astronaut course on how to cook snakes and shit like that, and how to trap animals. They just ran around and played games, in Cerro, Colorado.
So these guys are real dissatisfied with the training that they got, and they got that from people.
Well, especially if they were survivors of the Bay of Pigs and had to escape overland or by boat to get to hell. They weren't rescued by the destroyers that Gray Lynch brought in. These guys were really pissed off.
And they got their training from people
and then the ones after they were released just before Christmas '62 and came out to our camps, and they were given the choice of going to Fort Benning and becoming officers or staying with us. Many of them chose to stay with us because they thought they'd been sold out fucking totally, that they were not trained either to live off the land, be guerrillas, or be amphibious fucking Marines. So, and having done 18 months in a bad prison situation and almost put up against the wall, they weren't happy campers.
But they were pissed off.
When they got real fucking training from us, they were shocked and more pissed off.
And they were pissed off at their original trainers who didn't give them the right training, which was who?
They're pissed off at the CIA particularly.
But what about individuals? I mean, Ayers or Kane or that whole group? Or who?
Yeah.
Okay, so those people were both involved in training these guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
So here we were in competition, and it's just like in Buchanan's article, the only article, the one on New Orleans in the Miami Herald about me setting up camps north of Lake Pontchartrain and all that bullshit, at the end of the article, it says Hemming is still the most respected American on the scene who is actually and correctly training Cuban exiles, which had me worried a little bit.
Why?
It pointed the fucking finger at me. It would give Fidel's boys the idea they shouldn't even fuck around with JM Wave or anybody else. They should come after us.